To those of us joining, we're going to give it 1 or 2 more minutes as people come in and we'll get started momentarily.
Hello all, and welcome to our Friday Digest series. Thank you for joining us. I am Marisa Olszewski. I'm Environmental Policy Manager here at Maryland LCV. And as always, your presence here speaks to the power of our community and to your commitment for environmental causes that affect us all. Our goal with these Friday Digests is to provide you with information, tools, and resources to be an informed and active advocate. We also want the agenda for these virtual meetings to be driven by your interests and needs. So please let us know what you want to hear. The easiest way to provide this information will be to fill out a survey that you will receive at the end of today's session. Now, as you join us today, please do type your name into the chat. Tell us where you're joining from. And as we move through this half hour together, please type your questions and comments into the Q&A or use the chat box, and we will get to as many of them as we can to shape today's conversation. Today, we will be doing a deep dive into the challenges and opportunities in restoring the Chesapeake Bay. Earlier this year, the Comprehensive Evaluation of System Response, or the CESR report, was released. We'll be going over key findings from that report, strategies for accelerating progress toward water quality goals, and how you can be engaged in our Bay efforts. To that end, we are excited to welcome our special guest today, Kurt Stephenson. Dr. Stephenson is an environmental economist from Virginia Tech University, and he is a member of the body of scientific advisors to the Bay Cabinet. Dr. Stephenson played a pivotal role in the report's development, and he will help break it down for us today. Welcome, Dr. Stephenson.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Now, before we fully dive in, let's begin with a bit of background for this Bay report and how we are here today. The Chesapeake Bay, as many of you may know, is a uniquely special estuary. It has an incredibly large 64,000 square mile watershed, which spans 6 states and the Washington, D.C. Despite its watershed size, the bay itself is surprisingly shallow. It's this unique land-to-water ratio, the largest in the world, which means the actions we take on land have a profound impact on the bay's health. Protecting the bay is why we're here today. The Chesapeake Bay program, which was established in 1983 with a simple pledge to address the bay's environmental challenges, has become a critical part of restoration efforts. Today, the Bay Partnership is following the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement that was established in 2014. And now the target date set for the ambitious restoration goals in that agreement, it's just over the horizon, 2025, little more than a year away. In Maryland, our support of restoration work has included things like setting up a critical area commission, a system to limit the control of land use near the bay. Maryland has also developed and maintained the Bay Restoration Fund, perhaps better known as our flush fee, which improves wastewater treatment technology and adds mitigation techniques for agricultural impacts. We've attempted to address stormwater issues through updated regulations. We've supported large-scale oyster restoration, and more recently, we've improved our forest conservation efforts. In other words, Maryland has been responsive to the partnership in working to address many aspects of restoration and protection of the Chesapeake Bay, and yet we are aware that we are missing the mark on these goals for 2025. We are seeing improvements in the bay's health, and especially in light of new and the continued challenges that come from population growth and climate change, The progress that we have made is a testament to the collective efforts that we've put forth to this point. At Maryland LCV, we work closely with the Choose Clean Water Coalition. It's a diverse coalition of more than 290 organizations across the watershed that advances policies, messaging, actions, and accountability for bay restoration. Maryland LCV also leads on many legislative initiatives in Maryland to advance clean water through state policy. As we head into the legislative session that will include water policy and bay restoration legislation, we wanted to make sure you, our members, are up to date with the latest scientific report and data. To that end, I will give it over to Dr. Stephenson, instrumental in drafting the CESR report. Kurt, I'm excited to pass it over to you for this deep dive, or since we're talking about the Chesapeake Bay, we'll say a wade into the CESR report.
Well, thank you, Marisa. That was a great introduction. Maybe you needed to do the whole thing. I really appreciate being here, and really looking forward to sharing what the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee produced this spring, and it's been a part of the ongoing discussions about how do we move forward with the Bay program. And for folks who don't know, STAC is an independent advisory committee to the management portion of the Chesapeake Bay program. We advise directly the elected leaders and their delegates, our designees of scientific and technical issues that are emerging. We are an independent body, so this report, no one asked us to do it. No one paid us to do it. It was an all-volunteer effort that took almost 4 years to produce. And this is sort of the role that STAC has filled over the years. If we see a need, we see an emerging scientific or technical issue, we take it upon ourselves to bring this forward to the partnership. So let me just tell you briefly what's in the CESR report. As Marisa said, the Bay Agreement has a lot of different parts. We just took on one piece of the Bay Agreement, and that's the water quality piece. And so we were looking at basically efforts to address the eutrophication of the bay that comes from excess nitrogen and phosphorus moving into the estuary, which then produces excess phytoplankton growth, which blocks sunlight to the bottom, which diminishes habitat, for example of submerged aquatic vegetation. And it also, the excess biomass produces low dissolved oxygen. And so the hypoxic zones that are emerge in the bay in the summertime is a direct result of this eutrophication process. So that's really what we were focusing on this with this report, is on those types of issues, those water quality issues. And the motivating driver of the report is basically this graphic. This graphic is, and this is the only graphic I'll have, I promise. But this is percent attainment of the water quality goals throughout the Chesapeake Bay. And the water quality goals are mostly dissolved oxygen and water clarity or submerged aquatic vegetation. And it's just like Marisa had said in her introduction, we are making progress. Water quality is improving. Our efforts to reduce the amount of nutrients running into the bay is paying dividends. We see an upward trend. But the other striking thing about this figure is that we're still around 35% of achievement of the total standards, the total goals, the water quality goals that we set out for ourselves. So the progress is real, but it's slow. And so we're trying to figure out, well, is this what we expected? And if not, why is this is slower than expected? So that's what we sort of set off to answer, was that why question. And I just wanted to briefly take the time today just to mention 4 sort of themes of the CESR report, and give you a couple illustrations of how we came to those conclusions. And the first one is that achieving the nutrient reductions, particularly for non-point sources, and that's urban runoff, agricultural runoff from the land, is proving much more difficult and challenging than we originally anticipated. And it's absolutely essential that we address those if we're going to achieve our nutrient reduction goals. The second point is that, as Marisa said, water quality is improving. Our actions are having a consequence, but it is much more difficult than we anticipated in terms of achieving the goals. And it's doubtful that we're going to achieve all of the goals everywhere. And it's just a hard reality because we're living in a very different system, very different watershed than in the past. The third thing, which is a good news, is there's a lot of things that we think that can be improved on to improve the living resource response to all of our investment and all of our efforts. And I think this is a really positive and good news kind of message that comes from CESR, that if we can refocus on what's ultimately the most important thing that we're trying to do is trying to improve the conditions and the number of critters living in the bay. And we think that there's opportunities to do that. That's a very positive message from CESR. And the last thing is that, we're really in a different management world now. These non-point sources, we're talking about, tens of thousands of sources all across this 64,000-mile area. And we really need to increase our capacity to learn about the system. And so we think that there's some things that we can do to do that as well, to improve our capacity to respond to these new challenges. So just a quick thing about the non-point source. What we're really talking about is agricultural runoff and urban runoff. The program has been tremendously successful at reducing wastewater, nutrient and discharges from wastewater treatment plant, air deposition of nitrogen, tremendous success stories, but the future is on the left side. The future is addressing the agriculture and the urban runoff. And as I said before, these are tough nuts to crack. And they're by far the largest remaining sources of nutrients flowing into the bay, and they're proving the most difficult to move the needle. And here's just an illustration of story of why that is. This is a picture of a watershed in Virginia called Smith Creek. It's important because it is a showcase watershed in the Chesapeake Bay program. So we've sort of highlighted this watershed for additional resources, additional study, additional conservation. In the foreground, you see a BMP. This is a riparian buffer that was installed 5 or 6 years ago by the landowner with the help of the NRCS. Very successful, very well implemented practice. And in this watershed, we see lots of these going in, 4-fold increase in the number of BMPs. Great success story in that respect. At the same time, in the background, you see some cattle near a loafing lot. There's a barn nearby. On the top of the hill, there's a poultry house. At the same time we're adding BMPs, we're also intensifying use. And so the net result of those two things is in this watershed, despite of all the good things and all the good things that we're doing and undoubtedly improving the habitat of the stream, we're also seeing that nitrogen and phosphorus loads are increasing over time because of this intensification. So there's this push-pull going on in a lot of watersheds. We see it in Maryland too, and for example, in the Chop Tank and in some of the places where we have very intensive agriculture, and in even urban areas. So this also applies, this same dynamic applies to urban areas. And the other challenge that we have is that some of our models are predicting that load should be either flat or decreasing. So we've also got this tension of trying to figure out in a very complex way, well, are we getting the reductions that we think we're getting? So sometimes it might not be the monitoring data, and the very localized data might be telling us a little bit something differently than what the models are telling us at the Bay program area. So this is a challenge in a nutshell with the Smith Creek watershed. And just finally, a couple more pieces, and I'm looking forward to questions. The second piece about, well, we've gotten these nitrogen reductions from wastewater and from air deposition and holding the line on the non-point sources. What's happening to the bay water quality? So we're seeing, and so this is a sort of cartoonish cross representation of the bay system. And what we've done for the water quality goals is we've broken the bay up into 5 different habitats. We got the deep water habitat, the deep channel habitat, the open water, the shallow water, and the migratory fish habitats. And we have goals for all these different habitats for different parts of the bay. So we have dissolved oxygen goals for the deep water, dissolved oxygen goals for the deep channel and the shallow and the migratory fish areas and the open waters. And we've got sort of a water clarity grass goal for these shallow water areas. And so if you're looking at how we've done in these different parts of the bay, right? So if we look at the open water, depending on the year that you look, we're between 45 and 70% achieving our dissolved oxygen goals in the open water. But where we're really having trouble is making headway is in the deeper water sections of the bay. So we've only achieved between 0 and 10% of our goal, for example, in the deep channel. Now, the dissolved oxygen goals in the deep channel, we don't know. It's high, and it's probably doubtful whether we're ever going to achieve the goals we set for ourselves in 2020, in the early 2000s. It's a very different system. Climate change is working against us because, as Marisa said, it's a very shallow system. And as the water warms up, it holds less oxygen. And so there's a variety of these types of stressors that we just don't have any control over right now within the Bay program. And it's going to be hard to get those sort of deep water goals. And given all the headwinds we have with non-point sources and land use change, population, as well as the climate change. But the good news, we think, is that there are opportunities, we think, to improve living resources with our management actions. So if we go back to look at those different habitats and we look at, where the majority of those living resources reside, they reside in those shallow waters, those migratory fish habitats, those open waters. And if we can move the needle, improve habitat and improve water quality in those areas, we think we can really make a difference in terms of the living resource impact. And this is also, fortunately, where people interact with the watershed on these shallow waters, near shore environments. But it's going to require us rethinking the way we try to achieve goals and the types of goals that we set for ourselves. And finally, I'll just say something about the management of how we go about trying to achieve our goals. The staff concluded that we need, as a program, as the Chesapeake Bay program, and as the Chesapeake Bay program partnership, we need to really increase our capacity to learn to respond to these new challenges, particularly with respect to controlling these runoff-based sources and trying to figure out what type of investments are going to give us the best bang for our buck, so to speak, in terms of living resources. And then when you get down to non-point sources and you get down to these shallow areas, they're all very unique places. Every place where we live and work is a unique place. And then these shallow water habitats vary greatly across the bay in these nearshore environments. And so we have managed in the past based on, sort of this one sort of centralized model that sort of tries to get this big centralized goal. And, there's a tension there when we go to these more local areas. And so we need to, we came to the conclusion, we need to sort of shift and sort of prioritize how we're learning about these systems at the local scale, both on the watershed and within the bay itself. So that is the absolute shortest summary I've ever given of CESR. So hopefully people will have some questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kurt. Just at the end there, you were talking about the need to shift to both the shallow management and also how we get the data and gather the data that helps inform this, and that gap that we have right now with the larger model. How did when you put the report together, were there specific strategies that you talked about that you could see achieving in the short term to adjust the management that we have now that would help to achieve that? What does that look like?
Oh, you in terms of up in the watershed, in terms of nutrient reductions, or
starting with just that gathering of data? What do we do now, and what would be helpful to change that, and how achievable is that? Does that require a lot more money, or are we just looking at shifting where our priorities are?
It probably a bit of both. we talked about the need to incentivize and to encourage and to collect more localized information, and that includes both the monitoring level data, trying to figure out what's going on, for instance, in the chop tank, where in the chop tank at the major monitoring stations right at the tidal interface, the rim station is showing that phosphorus loads and nitrogen loads are going up, while our model says it's going down. And we're trying to figure out, okay, well, in the chop tank, why is that? And so we need to do some more finer. The recommendation is more additional monitoring, making use of that monitoring information, and perhaps some more finer scale modeling to try to figure out, okay, if we change this, can we change the trajectory of those loads? So we've leaned heavily on the Chesapeake Bay program model in the past, but we're getting to the point where it can only tell us so much, and we've got to sort of, direct people's attention more to these localized areas and using more of that localized information and better and more.
Right. Great. We have a question from Carol here that I think is a great one. And I don't know how much you can offer this in terms of data versus what you know here, but how much impact does Maryland, the state of Maryland, have on the Bay watershed versus the rest of the Bay watershed?
Well, that's a great question, and it depends sort of where you are. So, obviously, some of the tributaries that are flowing in, will be highly dependent on what's coming off from the Maryland landscape. But if you're looking at, so for instance, if you're looking at the sort of the main channel and the north channel, the majority of the impact in those areas would be coming from Pennsylvania. So it sort of depends on where you are in the watershed and I think, and that's one of the suggestions of CESR is that if we can focus additional attention in some of those shallower areas, like for instance, there's significant opportunities and challenges in, very specific Maryland waters that Maryland could work on. Same with Virginia, right? That we can maybe see a bigger impact sooner if we work in those areas while we're also working on this larger problem.
Did CESR make any predictions for how fast we think, how we can do this acceleration, or what to expect out of an acceleration if we make these changes?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that this problem was a long time in the making, a long time, hundreds of years, and so we really got to sort of reset expectations. We can work faster in terms of doing stuff on the ground, but I think it's important to realize that you got to set expectations that things will not change rapidly in the water. So, for instance, that we have large stores of nitrate stored in groundwater in various parts of the watershed from historical applications. We call it legacy nitrogen. And there's large stores of this legacy nitrogen stored in soils, but primarily in groundwater. When you look at phosphorus, a lot of that phosphorus is stored in soils. Phosphorus is very sticky compared to nitrogen. So it tends to bind the soils. And we thought, well, if we just kept that soil in place, phosphorus would stay in place. Well, what we're learning now is that phosphorus binds up the soil. It's like a sponge, and eventually it will use up all of that absorptive capacity, and then it'll start leaking out. And we've got a tremendous amount of phosphorus stored in soils, particularly in areas with a lot of livestock, because manures are particularly high in phosphorus. So, and it will take decades to drain that phosphorus. Even if we stopped applying phosphorus today, it will take decades to drain some of this phosphorus out of soils. So we got to realize there's a long lag time that's sort of just built into the system.
Thanks for that. Another question here. Let's see. I think the question is getting at where can we have the greatest influence on our non-point sources? This is looking at something like how individuals can help and support water quality goals, right? On like our own private properties or in our own neighborhoods. But is there still benefit to doing that? Should we still be putting effort into that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that we stressed, I think it came out a little bit in that Smith Creek watershed example, is that the surefire way to reduce nutrients to running off to the bay is to reduce the import of nutrients into the watershed. And if you're importing those nutrients, then, and if you got too many in one area, then redistribute them to areas that are deficit. So we call it a mass balance issue. There's just, in some areas, there's just too much being imported and not enough being exported in terms of agricultural products or in terms of, use of litter and those types of things. So, I mean, poultry litter. So the biggest thing that we can do, I think, is to reduce those imports and reduce those concentrations of nutrients on the landscape. There's a rule, one of my colleagues, Zach Easton, always says, is that non-point source, even though it's distributed, it's everywhere, it's distributed unevenly. There's an 80-20 rule that 20% of the land is generating 80% of the load. And I think, and that rule sort of applies at the watershed level, and it applies even to a field level. So at any scale, that rule is kind of, you can argue about if it's 80-20 or 90-10 or 70-30, but that rule applies. So if you're looking around the neighborhood, so I would say, the best thing we can do is reduce our use of fertilizers. If you're looking at those things, that's a surefire way. And the second thing is that not every area is going to be contributing equally. We've got to increase our capacity to find those quote unquote hot spots.
Which again points to your suggestions in the report that we need to change our scientific monitoring and management and really increase our localized monitoring so we can have better data to inform our actions, right?
Right. And incentivize people to look for them, for sure.
One other question I just wanted to touch on here. Someone asked, how is climate change complicating the efforts to restore the bay? And I think this is probably a good little bit of information that people don't necessarily associate climate change in the bay and understand where the water quality connection is there. But if you could give a quick overview of how
that's a good question too, man. You guys are on point. Several ways, and not all of them are, detrimental to the bay. So there's some things that are, I mentioned it, temperatures will warm the bay. It's very shallow, so it's going to warm up fairly quickly. You already see the warming happening, and warmer waters hold less oxygen. We're just running on the treadmill on that one, because we've got to run faster than climate change is happening, and it's already a challenge. The other thing is, precipitation patterns will change. Some things that will help is like a lot of denitrification, which, you take nitrogen that's available for algae growth and plant growth. Some of that denitrification will be accelerated because denitrification works better in warmer weather. So, some of that nitrogen will be taken out of the system naturally. So that's a benefit. But the other thing is, and there's just a whole suite of things that will happen. The other thing that will happen is, the growing season will be longer. Right. And so there's things like, the fact that people will farm more intensively because now they can double crop more easily. So so now you'll be putting, for instance, nitrogen and phosphorus to grow 2 crops instead of 1. So that's great for food production, not so great because you'll be probably importing more nitrogen. So there's a whole raft of sort of consequences, and they're all sort of multiplied, and it's hard to sort of separate them all out, but those are some of the big ones.
Thanks. I appreciate you explaining that. We do have more questions, but we will try to follow up with people. We've monitored the chat, and we'll get back to you if there are other questions that we can answer. Thank you so much. This was incredibly insightful. It gave us a lot of information in a short amount of time, helped people understand the CESR report, the importance of it. I think we've shared the link to that report in the chat. Maybe we can do that again, and we'll share that out with a follow-up email. And I did just want to take the opportunity here in wrap up to offer a quick action to the people on the call today. And as we were just finishing up talking about climate change, we know that this is a problem that has caused extra trouble with our bay woes and with extra nutrients in the system. And later this month, the governor will be releasing Maryland's climate plan. And between now and then, we are supporting an effort to let the governor know that we want a strong and well-funded plan to reduce our emissions in Maryland and to keep Maryland as a leader in climate change action. So we have a link that's been dropped in the chat. Please go ahead and follow that and send your message to the governor to let him know you support that action. And that's all the time that we have. So thank you everyone for joining us and for supporting in our work. And we will try to get back to you. We will share a survey so you can tell us how you thought about today's webinar and also what else you would like to see upcoming. And thank you everyone for attending.